Preaching today stinks. It's awful. If you go into your average church, you're going to be disgusted by the lack of teaching that's going on. The congregations are starving for a lack of good preaching. Well, if that disrupted your equilibrium, I think that's what Thomas Gordon's trying to do with his book, Why Johnny Can't Preach. The media have shaped the messengers. Gordon has a background in media ecology, and it's his observation that over the last 50 years or so, we've really shifted from a language-driven media to an image-based media. What does that mean? Well, the advent of the television and magazines and other image-based media have made us short-circuit how we used to process things through reading classics, poetry, digging into scripture, and then taking that information and synthesizing it through the written word, correspondence through letters. And now, because of that, our preaching suffers. His premise for the book, Why Johnny Can't Preach, comes from two other books. One, Why Johnny Can't Read, which is a 1950s phonics book, and Why Johnny Can't Write. So he takes these two ideas, Johnny can't read and Johnny can't write. And that's why Johnny can't preach effectively. So you can imagine a book that's written in 2007, well into the advent of the internet. But he doesn't even really get into that, as his focus is on television, even the telephone, how that's compromised our communication through casual communication. But if you compound that with internet, smartphones, texting has short-circuited how we communicate through the written word. And we're really in a mess with how we consume media. So then because of that, we don't process it well in ministry. So what's the solution to this? Well, first of all, do we have our hand on the pulse of what's wrong? Are we really in a good accountability situation in our church? He argues that no, we're not. The pastor's not open to critique. There used to be an annual review that was a tradition, and that's sort of lacking as well, where the pastor would get feedback on how he was preaching from leadership. But he also says that we should be able to ask our congregants, just on a general basis, are they getting what we're preaching? Are we communicating clearly? And he breaks it down in just basically a few steps. Is there really a common point or a thrust in my message that they're getting? Secondly, is that thrust really based on the passage that was read? Or am I trying to manipulate some agenda or tweak a theme to shoehorn in some idea of mine? Does the message really fall in line with the scripture that was read? And thirdly, do my illustrations that I'm using and the references really fall in line with that same point? Or am I just grabbing things out of thin air? Does it really follow a theme? Is there a movement to the sermon? So this is sort of a renaissance back to traditional preaching, that there really be expository, digging into the scripture and communicating what's in the scripture to our congregants. It's basically inductive Bible study, what we've learned here at Wesley Biblical. So you can really see how this applies to what we do at seminary and how we interact with each other in this class as we steel sharpen steel through constructive criticism and learning and honing this craft of message giving to people. So that's productive. And you can also see how you've probably heard from more than one professor that we read and write a ton. You've felt that as you've gone through courses. We read, we write, we read, we write. And there's an intentionality to that. I really believe it's part of what he's trying to address in this book. When we really synthesize reading and writing, it makes us better, stronger communicators. And that is a solution to this problem. Another thing he offers is using a homiletics partner, someone who is also preaching or in ministry and working on sermons that we can run ideas by, run sermon outlines by, and ideas and themes that we're working on, just to make sure that we're on track, that we're communicating clearly, scripturally, right out of the Bible. A couple critiques of Gordon's. First of all, he has sort of a kids these days mentality that all preaching has gone to hell in a handbasket, and I think we could all argue we've heard excellent preaching. But his point's valid. It's somewhat anecdotal that there's 30% of preaching is good, the rest of it's horrible. So it has kind of a curmudgeon-y attitude to it, but he brings up valid points. Another thing I think is a criticism is he seems to value in more than one place in the book that pulpit ministry is the highest calling of the preacher. And he says if you ask your average congregant, they would value that above other things like compassion ministry, visiting the youth, caring for the lost, things that I would feel are incredibly important to the people sitting in our pews. And I think if you ask them, they would probably, for the most part, rather have someone who's accessible and doing visitation than crafting a sermon all week long. But I don't think it's an either or situation. I think you can have both. And so I get what he's saying. He brings up valid points. It's an excellent book. I highly commend it to you and hope that you choose to read it when you get time. Thank you.